is Kyle Hunter and Elijah Fleming with Don't Mean Nothing. We're here with Pat Gallagher. Pat is a Green Beret, Special Forces veteran, Vietnam veteran. It's actually a funny story how we met. To begin with, is I collect toy soldiers and purchased some a few years ago from Pat. Had no idea who he was, and one day picked up some old model kits to throw them on a pile so I could sell them. And a piece of paper fell out that said, "Thank you for supporting a disabled veteran," with his phone number on it. So I just called him and we hit it off, talked for about an hour, and here we are. It's a very cool story, just how we got together, and we appreciate you having us, obviously.
It was great having you.
So
Thank you.
So to start, let's go with where'd you grow up? How was your childhood?
Yeah, I was born in 1944 in New York City, and spent a couple years there as a child, obviously. My dad was in World War II, so didn't get to see him until I was almost 2 years old by the time he came back. And because of the GI Bill, we moved out to Long Island to the very first suburb ever built called Levittown. And for a kid growing up, it was idyllic because my backyard was a potato farm with an apple orchard, and we could play, kids kind of games in there. So had a great childhood. Unfortunately, my dad died when I was 8. He had been wounded in World War II, and he was, of all things, bowling one night. And as he leaned over to throw the ball in, a piece of shrapnel that he still had in him cut his aorta. So he bled to death. And because it was an internal bleeding, they weren't able to save him.
Where was he in World War II?
He was actually, he was in the unit that actually took over Hitler's, and my memory's a bit hazy, but up in the Alps, he had that
Hornet's Nest.
Right. So my father actually was an artist, commercial artist by profession, and he was one of the first to actually go into the building. And of course, Hitler was a so-called artist too, and had a lot of art books. So my dad got several of those art books and brought them back to the States. So that was kind of his war souvenirs. And he had the Nazi flag that was flying over the place and some other souvenirs. And day after he died, my mother threw them all out.
Oh,
so,
man.
And she kept a couple of the books, which I still have. But
so where was he wounded?
He had been wounded in the battle coming up to, he was already in Germany when he got wounded. So quite honestly, I don't remember where he got wounded.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously he got wounded in the body, but I don't remember what city or anything that.
Was he airborne?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Wow, very cool.
He was part of just a regular infantry division.
Wow,
so,
incredible stuff. So
yeah.
Go back to your childhood. Sorry, but for the sidebar.
No.
It's just really cool to hear.
So grew up in Merrick, New York. Mm-hmm. My mother remarried again when I was 13. Great guy. Went to high school in Merrick, Long Island. Played football, basketball, and was a high jumper on track. And then wound up going to the University of Dayton out in Ohio. I was an aspiring artist myself, and they had a great art school. Plus they had a D2 football team. So I thought I would be able to play football out there because obviously I played football in high school, not very well, never even got first team. But when you're 18 years old, you think you can do anything. So I found out they didn't need a 140-pound noodle-arm quarterback. So my football career lasted 2 plays with them, and that was it. So joined a fraternity when I was there. Many of them are still my closest friends, spread all over the country now. But my junior year, I switched majors. So I wound up going into pre-business instead of pre-dental, which I originally signed up for, and pre-art. So I had an extra 2 semesters to go. And then at the end of my first semester, I got that dreaded draft notice that everybody my age, every guy at that time, dreaded. So for my 21st birthday, my friends took me out, and after 15 shots of Jägermeister, next day waking up with a raging hangover, I went down and enlisted. It's one of those events that happen in your life and you go, what the hell were you thinking of? So 2 weeks later, I was on a bus going down to Fort Knox, Kentucky.
So explain that process. Sorry to interrupt you, but explain that process. What's the purpose of enlisting after you get the draft notice?
So when you're drafted, you go for 2 years. And my raison d'etre, as they say, to go 3 years, which is what happens when you enlist, was I knew I was going to wind up going to Vietnam. And I said, you know what, I don't want to go over there with a bunch of draftees. Because at that time, 67, 68, there was a lot of issues over in Vietnam. You know, there's a lot of issues in the country. The country was divided over a lot of protesters and stuff, you know, supposedly spitting on soldiers and those types of things. And over in Vietnam, there were drugs, there were racial issues, there was a whole bunch of other things that just did not, you know, I just was not interested in having to go through that. And I also had just read Robin Moore's book called The Green Berets. And I went, you know what? That's what I want to do. So when I went down to enlist, I said I want to be a Green Beret. And the guy kind of rolled his eyes and said, oh, you have to go to airborne school first and then go to selection. And maybe you'll become a Green Beret. You know, and I'm sure he was chuckling on the side. Because again, I was 5'9" at that time. Maybe 135 pounds, so I wasn't the Rambo kind of looking guy that they were probably looking for at that time. But anyway, so I went down to Fort Knox, Kentucky. So the platoon leader at that time, the regular Army leader, said, Gallagher, you're not only the only one that college educated, but you're the only high school graduate of the 40 people that we have in this platoon. So half the people were from Detroit, gangbangers from Detroit. The other half were from Hazard, Kentucky. You know, the Hatfield and McCall kind of moonshiner types of things with the southern drawl. So they give you, as the platoon guide, which they made me, they give you a Bassard with stripes on it, sergeant stripes. So here I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be, you know, I'm going to really show them what I'm made of and the leadership and all that. So like the third day I was there, after everybody got their shots and their orientation and everything, sergeant came in and said, we're going to inspect tomorrow. So the captain's going to come in, so make sure everything is spick and span, the toilets are clean, you know, the beds are made and the sheets are tight. I said, not a problem. So I go in the bathroom, there's a guy named Llewellyn from Hazard, Kentucky. And I said, oh, Llewellyn, you're already in the bathroom. So what I'd like you to do is mop this and mop that. And he went, well, F you, college boy, knock me out. I hadn't been in a fight since like the 6th grade. I'm looking down, birds are flying around. And I'm going, I don't think I have a total grasp of this leadership thing yet. So then I got up and I got in a fight with this guy, and a bunch of guys came in and pulled us apart. But my girlfriend at the time came down to visit me about 4 weeks after I'd started, and my head was probably the size of a pumpkin. I never had gotten so many fights in all my life. So I said, you know, I got to go to OCS and be an officer, because they don't beat officers up. So so I took the test and passed it, and they said, okay, you can go to officer school, but you enlisted as a paratrooper, so you have to go to jump school first, which I did, and absolutely loved it. You know, I had my eyes wide open from my first jump and closed for the next 5 to get my wings. So, but I wound up at the end of my career with 500 jumps. Absolutely loved it. So went to jump school and then started into OCS. And we started, I think, with 170 guys and whittled it down very, very quickly. So most of these people were college graduates, but several weren't. We had a lot of NCOs coming back from Vietnam, as an example, who decided to become an officer. And they had really a step ahead of all the rest of us, because they had the discipline and, you know, the combat experience too. But and again, they spent a lot of time right in the beginning, especially weeding out people, making you do really stupid things. Give you a quick example. The lights are out at 10 o'clock at night. So the TAC officer would come in at 5 after 10 and wake somebody up and said, I want a 200-page report on my desk tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. So what they were looking for was how would you organize yourself to get 200 pages of typed report on their desk in the morning. So what you had to do is you had to get up, you had to get everybody else up, and because the lights were out, you had to do it, put typewriters on your lap in the bathroom, and you'd be assigning, okay, you do page 1, you do page 2, you do page 3, and give them assignments and those types of things. And that was the way that they were weeding out, because some people would say, what, screw this. This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. And it was. But it would test how quick you were on your feet, how quick you organized yourself, how quick you organized other people. So it was actually, when it looked on the surface like it was, oh God, this is just harassment, it really was, there was thoughts behind it about what is the best way to find somebody who can react and think quickly and organize themselves quickly and not just melt. And a lot of guys did melt. So I think we graduated roughly 105 people out of the 175 that started. From there, because I was already airborne qualified, I was selected to go, one of 3 in my class that were selected to go to Special Forces. So, and again, that was my dream because I had read that Robert Moore book about going to Special Forces. So at that time, there was a selection period of about 3 weeks, I think it was, where it was like Hell Week, if you've ever seen any of the Navy SEAL movies and those types of things. It was in the middle of the summer, and you'd be low crawling through sawdust and would get down in every crack and crevice, and you'd be sweating, and the physical fitness part of it was just almost unenduring, and it just kept at it and at it and at it. And at the same time, they'd be screaming in your face, they'd be doing all these other things, just to see who, and a lot of people dropped out. A lot of people dropped out. So when we started, I think there was maybe 100 people started, and only 20 were left by the end of it.
Wow.
So, but it was a good way of weeding out these people before we actually started training. And I don't know how much people know about Special Forces, but especially at the junior officer level, Special Forces works in teams of 12 people. So there's 2 officers, a CO and an XO. There's a team sergeant who basically rules all the NCOs. There's an intelligence sergeant. There's 2 weapons people, heavy weapons and light weapons. 2 medics that go to school for a year to be a medic. 2 demolitions experts, and I'm sure I'm probably, I don't know if it's 12, but it's close. But you work together very cohesively, and you work together as a team. So the issue with going to Vietnam, though, in Special Forces was, today, as an example, a Special Forces team will go over as a unit, and they've been together for years. At that time, you would be plugged into any team that needed somebody, over there. So you didn't necessarily, again, it was still very professional and a lot more professional than the regular Army, but it wasn't the cohesiveness that you intimately knew, each other and what strengths and weaknesses and what you had to make up for and those types of things. So, but great training. Went to Alaska, of course, because I was going to Vietnam, and spent a month up there climbing, doing crevasse training, mountain climbing. We went out on the ice pack up by the Arctic Circle. Just very intense training. We went down to Panama, the jungle school. So I spent the whole time there training. So I was also picked out, at that time, they tried an experiment with Special Forces. They put a 3rd officer in called a CA PSYOPs officer, Civil Affairs and Psychological Operations. And the thought there was, when you went to Vietnam, you would work with the local villages and go in with med caps as an example with doctors and help them, with medical types of issues, dig wells, create farms, do all those kinds of things with people, as well as then go out on operations and do psychological warfare things on operations, like leaving little calling cards on dead bodies and those types of things. So it was pretty interesting training too. So I spent a whole year going through that kind of training and then went to Vietnam.
So you actually went over as a PSYOPs officer?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was my first assignment. I was assigned to BWWII, which is a B team. Now, a B team has 8 A teams, at least it did at that time, under them. And my B team was in 2 Corps. So again, in Vietnam, they had 4 corps. First Corps was right up against the North Vietnamese border, down to, I think, south of Da Nang. Then my Corps had Nha Trang and BWWII, which is where I was assigned. And then the 3rd Corps, I think, was Saigon, and then there was a corps south of that.
So before you got there, where were you at mindset-wise? Like, were you nervous about going over? Do you remember what you were thinking about? Were they keeping you up at night?
For whatever reason, I really wasn't. I was excited about going over there. And again, I keep going back to that Robert Moore book, but he made it sound very, very interesting. Much more so than it actually turned out to be sometimes. But no, I wasn't. Now, the first time people started shooting at me changed my mind pretty dramatically about that. So I went to BWWII, and I was their first CA PSYOPs officer. So, you have S1, which is personnel, S2, which is intelligence, S3 is operations, S4 is logistics. And this new position, S5, was the CA PSYOPs officer. But the cool thing about it was I got to go to all 8 of the operating camps and spend time with each camp, usually 2 or 3 days. And then I got to go on my first operation in a camp called Tuatar. Now, we were in the Central Highlands, so it was a very mountainous region that we were in, lots of valleys, a lot of places for people to hide. But Tuatar was different. It was very flat, and there wasn't a lot of foliage, so there was single trees, but there was not a lot of different places you could hide. So I went there, and I had a full kit with me every time I went to that, full kit being a rifle and my backpack and those types of things, canteens. So he said, we're going out on a quick operation. You want to come with us? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So it'd be my first combat role. So we flew into a pretty flat, open place that intelligence had seen North Vietnamese units moving through. So we went in with about 200 Montagnards. It was myself and Chuck Beasley, who he and I had been through training together. So he was the commander of the team, and I was just kind of a tag along.
Talk about the Montagnards and who they were and all that.
The Montagnards were a ethnic minority who did not look like the Vietnamese. They did not look Oriental at all. They looked much more like you would imagine the Filipino would look. They were relatively primitive and nomadic. So they would be spread all over, usually the Central Highlands, but also in Laos, in Cambodia, and sometimes small offshoots in Thailand, but primarily they were in the Central Highlands in North Vietnam. They were usually about 5'6", 5'7", fierce fighters, fiercely loyal to Americans. Now, some had worked for the North Vietnamese, and some still did while we were there, but the vast majority of them, and they were very tribal. So the people in that tribe would stick together, and many of the camps had different tribes. So we had Rade in my camp. The next camp had a Brew. The 3rd camp down from us were all Cambodians. So in effect, these people were mercenaries. So we paid them, pittance really. But
can you tell a story that we talked about on the phone about the officer that shot at the? Was it an officer that shot at the Mountaineer?
No. So in my camp was not a border camp. So 7 of the camps were border camps. My camp was a little bit inland because there was a lot of VC in the area that we were at originally, not when I was there. When I was there, it was relatively peaceful. But about 3 years before, so each camp was not run necessarily, it was run by the American Special Forces, but the camp was supposed to be run by Vietnamese Special Forces team, usually 10 or 12 guys, just like, mirrored what we were doing. But that didn't happen. Most of these guys were crooked and corrupt and drunk, and the Vietnamese guys, some Americans too. But one day a drunken Vietnamese sergeant came out and shot a Montagnard. Didn't kill him, but really screwed him up. So the Montagnards had a independence movement called I'm probably going to get it wrong, but PRU, and I can't remember what that stood for. But the Montagnards had told me that I knew that someday you guys are going to leave. And the Vietnamese are going to come back slaughtering us again like they did in the past. So as an example, Vietnamese pilots would come over and they would just drop, they had extra ammo or extra bombs on us. They would drop it on these Montagnard villages. So they really, the two sides were really very antagonistic against each other. But when the Americans came in, these guys and the ethnic Chinese group called the Nungs were very, very loyal to the Americans and very, happy about the things that we provided for them, the medical attention and all those types of things. So again, the loyalty was just incredible. So we had the raw day at my camp. The PRU guys who led them took all the Vietnamese, took 2 of them, cut their heads off, including the shooter, put them down the latrine. The rest of them they wrapped in barbed wire. And I think it was in Life magazine a couple years ago that I had read about, the thing that had happened. Now, again, some of the details are still a little bit hazy to me, but basically they rose up. Now, there were no Montagnard, there was only one Montagnard officer in the whole Vietnamese army. They brought him in to run the camp and brought some more Vietnamese NCOs, Montagnard NCOs in to work with these people. But they asked the Americans to stay in the team house. They said, don't come out for a day or two until after we're done cleaning up the camp. So the Vietnamese finally came in, took the barbed wire off, and then got these guys off. So I did that for about 3 months. And I got to see all the camps and spend time with all the different teams and get familiar with it and set up civil affairs and psychological operation little teams at each one of the camps. But this operation I was just talking about at Tuatar was the first combat operation I went on.
How long into this, to you getting there, was this first operation?
Probably a month and a half, maybe.
Okay.
So we get off the helicopter about 5 o'clock at night. We put together what's called an RON, remain overnight position, put together a perimeter. So there was a stream, about 30 meters away in a cut. So we were elevated above it about 10 or 12 feet, and the stream was running through. So I said, I'm going to take a bunch of guys down and get some water, make sure everybody had full canteens for the next day. And then each Montagnard carried 5 or 6 canteens with him, and I went along as security. And I had 6 guys with me and myself, and I just had my load-bearing equipment and my rifle, and then one other guy had a rifle with him. So I'm down there, and they're filling up the canteens with water. And it goes through my mind, I'm sitting on this log in a beautiful sunset and a nice wide stream going by. And I said, this is just like the John Wayne movie. And I said, just as John Wayne sits on that log, the Indians come out. and it was a Y in the stream. And just as I thought that, and this is very bizarre, but North Vietnamese started marching out, at least the lead element of it. And at first I looked at them and I said, what are my guys doing over there? And then I looked at them again and they were wearing pith helmets. And I went, oh, crap. Didn't say crap, but so, you know, I snapped my fingers and I slowly got down behind the log that I was on. And these guys just kind of melted, you know, back into the undergrowth just a bit. So I said, please, Jesus, I'll go to church every day for the rest of my life if these guys don't head my way, because all I got is this one rifle. And sure enough, they came right at me. So I said, how do I signal? I got 200 guys above me here that are maybe 30 yards in. How do I signal them? So when they got close, I shot the first guy and shot the second guy. And then instead of coming at me, which I thought they would do, and there was only 6 or 7 of them, the other 3 or 4 turned around and ran because they were the lead element. So within seconds, the whole top of the hill, or the whole top of the lip of the cut that I was on was full of my guys firing at them as they ran down the other stream. So we immediately saddled up and started going after them, thinking that they were part of the scouts for a much larger regiment, which intelligence had said was coming, you know, our way. So we called up airstrikes and other stuff. We never did catch up to them, and we never did find the main element. But we had the 2 that we unfortunately or fortunately shot. And I said, shit, I haven't even been on the ground an hour and already I'm in combat. I said, if this is going to be the rest of my life in Vietnam, I'm starting to doubt what I signed up for here. But after that, I had no more combat operations for, you know, the other camps that I went into besides that one. And again, I spent about 3 months doing that and organizing the different psychological operations, you know, units and stuff.
Two questions that I have for you. The first one is related to that operation. So shooting those 2 guys, did that affect you at all while you were in country? Was this something that you thought about?
Shooting those? Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely it did. Because the guy that, you know, I stopped and looked at him, and he was probably 15 years early. They all looked very, very young. But he was 15 years old. And I said, oh, what the fuck did I just do? You know, and then the other one was a little bit older too, and he was face down. I didn't even, you know, even see that. But I looked at the kid and I thought about him ever since, you know. Because that's, you know, the only one of the very few that I was dead sure, you know, I definitely took his life. And that works on you, you know, especially good Catholic boy growing up and going to confession and doing all that kind of stuff, and thou shalt not kill and all that.
So for some of the guys watching this, it might be vets that have been through similar things and have a hard time with it. What would you say to one of them if they were, if you're going to tell them how to deal with something like that?
I don't know whether you can. I don't feel like I can give advice to somebody like that. You know, I just say, whatever you have to do to heal yourself, do. And you'll probably never, ever be able to totally heal yourself. So periodically, you know, I still think about it. I can still see that kid's face. So, you know, I guess that's all I can say on the subject. He never really, now some guys are probably sociopathic and say, you know, doesn't bother me at all or whatever. The vast majority, especially in Vietnam, you know, we were all kids. So I was 23 years old at that time. You know, it stays with you. It doesn't wear on you necessarily. So it's not like I think about it all the time, but periodically I'll be down here and I'll see a picture or something like that and it'll flash by me. So.
And the second question was, when we looked through some of the photos, you had told the story about the ties. Was this time period when that happened with your mom sending the ties?
Yeah. No, that happened a little bit later. So after 3 months in the B team level, I went out to an A team where I spent the rest of my time in Vietnam. It was called 8234 An Loc. And again, it wasn't exactly on the border, but because the valley that we were in was relatively free from North Vietnamese and the BC, all our operations were on the border. So we would have, as you saw in the video, we would have a helicopter come in and take a company out, and I would go out with the sergeant and run an operation along the Cambodian border in our case. But we still ran combat patrols all around, excuse me, all around our camp, just to make sure, we didn't get too complacent. So, but almost all our combat operations were in other areas. So.
Okay, cool. And so take us through where you went after the first 3 months.
So again, I was at An Loc, and we had anywhere from 8 to 12 people there. Again, people would rotate in, rotate out. People being mostly sergeants. 1 or 2 other officers came in at different times. So the next time I got into an actual combat operation was I was sent out to a fire base, and the fire base had a couple 105s and 155 cannons, and I had my team of Montagnards, about 100 of them, and we provided security for that particular fire base. So, but I used to take them out on patrols and operations all around, so, in case anybody was scouting us or sneaking up on us, that type of thing. So I had gone out with a patrol, and we had bumped into a North Vietnamese unit that was setting up an ambush for another patrol. So we got them tangentially, but they hit us with a mine, and it was, 1 in a million chance, but I was behind a tree. So the mine hit me, and some of the shrapnel hit me in the head and knocked me out, but killed a guy in front of me. So I had a guy, and I'll show you his picture. His name is Y Chiet Mok. He's a Montagnard. So the other people that I had with me were not part of my group. They were some other Montagnards that had been left over from the guy that had it prior to me coming in. So this was like the first day I was there, just getting a recon around the area. But they saw me, and a head wound bleeds a lot, and I was unconscious, excuse me. So they thought I was dead, and they left me. So Hy Chip Mok came out, and he grabbed me and carried me back. So it literally saved my life. And, I paid him $100, which was nothing at that time. But, I mean, it was I'm saying it's nothing to me, but it was a big time to him. So we became fast friends, and it broke my heart when Vietnam fell, because I never found out what happened to him. So anyway, but he pulled me back and saved my life. So
So the guy in front of you, did he step on a mine?
No, it was a directional claymore mine that they were originally pointing in another way, and somebody must have turned it around in haste and set it up and shot it off and hit us. And then it was a small North Vietnamese, relatively small team. So I had, my group, and then I had a couple of Montagnards from the other team. And the North Vietnamese just turned around after they shut the mine off and left, what they call Didi Maud away. So we never had contact with them again.
It's wild.
Yeah. So that was my first Purple Heart there that I got. Would rather not have gotten that one, but it is what it is. At least I came back with it. So.
And were you in triple canopy jungle when this happened? Was
yeah,
this just
very,
like super
very
hard
thick.
to see? Yeah,
very thick.
So because they must have been close to be able to turn the mine.
They were very close. Yeah, And because that was my first day there, I didn't know the area. So it looked like there were no trails, but I found out later on there were very small trails. And by a trail, I mean maybe this wide. And they would run down that trail single file. So we'd find, boot prints and sometimes bare feet kind of prints and other things too. But they had, and again, this was not an area that my team was normally in. It was right on the border. So, and it was surprising, triple canopy, but you would also find canopy over these trails with the trees tied together so that it is like, in effect, walking down a tunnel. And some of these were really wide, and some of these had, especially the ones across the border along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, literally had logs all along the side, so they could drive down at night and bounce off the wall. They wouldn't put the lights on, they would just bounce off the logs to keep on the trail. I mean, it's some of the stuff, like you've talked to Stryker Myers. I mean, some of the stuff they saw, these were like high-speed roads, unbelievably perfectly camouflaged by tying trees and, those kinds of camouflage nets and those types of things over, would go for miles and miles and miles. And you could have a regiment go down there in a matter of an hour, and nobody would ever see them.
Wow.
So, yes, they were the enemy, but I have a great deal of admiration for these guys. I mean, first of all, they've been fighting there since 1945, so they knew the place intimately. And they were very, very courageous. Some were suicide bombers, but not like you see today. They would do it more out of patriotism to Vietnam, but you didn't see a lot of those. I never saw a suicide bomber. I just heard stories about it. But they were tenacious. They were brave, and again, they were kids just like we were. In some cases, a lot even younger. So, I have admiration for what they did.
Where did you find the tunnel system that you were talking about earlier?
So that was on the other side of the border. So again, the maps were very, very vague. So the one you saw in the video was called a BDA, a bomb damage assessment. So I was told to go to these coordinates, and I thought I was in these coordinates, but I wasn't. What I was unfortunately, I was inside Cambodia. And not hugely past the border, but probably 5 clicks in. And a B-52 had done a strike. And I had been called the day before saying a B-52s are going to do an arc light strike in this area. We'd like you to go in afterwards and do a bomb damage assessment on it. And they said, take a whole company with you because there still may be, we think there's a North Vietnamese regiment there. So again, we went in and you saw in the pictures these huge craters that these B-52s would make. And one who, I know you saw the big holes and stuff that are left, but one that for whatever reason I was out of film and I didn't film was that, I think I talked to you about it, was you could see it was like an apartment building that you see in these pictures, that half of the building falls down and you can see each room. That's the way this was. So it was 3 rooms. And one room was obviously a hospital, and because you could see beds with stained blood sheets on it and that kind of thing. And then the second one had supplies and stuff. And the first one, I have no idea what was it. It was too wrecked to see. We found several dead bodies, but again, didn't find anybody alive. And some of them had been there for a while, some of the dead bodies too. So I don't know whether the bomb had killed them or it was just a burial area. I have no idea. Excuse me.
And those tunnels, you said those went on for a long, long way.
Long way. So that tunnel system that I showed you, I think was probably because we walked all around it, and it went for hundreds and hundreds of yards. Because we'd find, pieces of it collapsed from the concussion of the bombs. The bomb didn't land on it, the concussion collapsed it. So it was almost like ditches that you would see running off. And some of these were very, very sophisticated. even concrete in some cases.
Really?
Similar to what I'm seeing in Gaza right now, those underground ones.
Yeah.
Not quite as sophisticated as that, because a lot of it was just dug out by hand. And a lot of them all had booby traps and stuff. So, as I told you before, I never went into a tunnel. I looked in one and went, I don't think so. Fortunately, I had a lot of little guys with me who I could send in. And even they didn't want to go in. But they did. But they didn't explore the whole thing because there was too many booby traps and snakes and, things that could really bite you in the butt. So one way or the other. So,
and you said that one of the examples of that was when they used the sappers to come out and throw satchel charges?
Yeah. So they would pop out literally like an opening, throw a satchel charge or throw a grenade or shoot at an AK-47, and the thing would flap back down, and you could hardly see it. The only way you could see it is because you knew exactly it was 5 yards this way right off of this trail.
Right.
But if you didn't know that, you'd walk right by it or walk right on it.
Wow.
They were geniuses at it. I mean, literally, you would look at some of this stuff and you would go, these are like the guys who built the pyramids. I mean, they were that creative and that, I don't know what the word is, but being able to construct these very, very elaborate tunnel systems with just basically hand tools and spades and stuff. Now, yes, they were at it since 1945, but still, some of these were unbelievably sophisticated.
Well, you have to think too. I mean, just knowing that the Ho Chi Minh Trail, how many times we bombed that over the course of the war, and they would just overnight rebuild it like
next day.
Crazy.
Yeah, they had construction battalions usually every 2 miles or something like that, with tools and stuff that they need. As soon as it happened, as soon as the bombs stopped dropping, that battalion was there. They were building bridges underwater. They were building, reconstructing the roads. They were putting the trees back together. I mean, they were just, and again, that's why I had to admire them. Yes, they were my enemy, but boy, I mean, these guys, I hope regular Vietnamese aren't watching this video, but some of the Vietnamese that I had worked with in South Vietnam, some were fabulous and some were great soldiers, but a lot of them weren't. And they became complacent, where you got these guys from the north who had nothing and would come down and do some of these very interesting things as far as the war goes. So you have to admire that.
Yeah.
The bravery, the tenacity, the ingenuity that they used. Yes, it was, in our case, for the wrong cause, but they did it.
So tell us about what happens after your last combat operation that you're on. So the mine happens. How long were you out after that?
Oh, just a matter of 2 or 3 minutes.
I mean, how long did it take you to recover? Were you right back in the field?
At that time, yeah.
Wow.
That time I was. I'll tell you another incident about that airplane that I talked about. So as part of, I was in this operation, and we had, not a big battle, but we had captured a couple people. It was actually back in Tuatar, I think, the place that I talked to you about. So the radio call said, bring a POW back. We've got an Air Force plane coming in, and we want you to take him over the battlefield, because he was a young officer. We want you to take him over the battlefield. We have these big, giant microphones, not microphones, but speakers on the side of this plane. And I think the plane was called an O2B. It was a prop in front, prop in back. The Air Force was the only one that had it. And then they had these big loudspeakers on the side. And what we were supposed to do was fly over the battlefield, and this guy would tell his comrades to surrender. And he said, the Americans, X number of us have surrendered, and they've given us food and medical care and all that kind of stuff. So we're flying around, and we're flying in a circle, so the loudspeakers go into the jungle. And I'm looking down at the jungle, and after about a half hour, I'm going, boy, I'm getting kind of queasy. And boy, I don't know. I feel like I'm going to throw up. And I turn around and I look, and in the back was the POW and our interpreter. And the POW had probably never even been in a wheeled vehicle, much less an airplane. And he was the color of that green jacket that little statue was wearing. So I tapped the pilot, and I went like, look at this guy. And we both turned around, and just as we did, he looked at us and went, bleh, and threw up on both of us. So this is a true story. So I look at the pilot, he looks at me, and we throw up on each other. And the plane is in a bank. The winds and the puke is flying all over the inside of the plane. The windshield is totally covered. And I'm on the microphone saying, we're going down, we're going down. I have no idea where we are. We're going down, and I'm trying to wipe the puke off the thing, and I'm throwing up at the same time. It was like the worst nightmare ever. So the pilot, and I showed you his picture in there, the one of the albums. So we weren't that far above the jungles. So I said, they're going to send my remains back to my poor mother back in New York with puke all over, stinking like puke. I said, what a way to go. I mean, how, I couldn't think of a worse way to go. But anyway, he pulled it out, and we flew back to play coup. And I'm on the phone, the microphone, because he couldn't even talk. He was still throwing up, trying to keep control of the planes at the same time. And I said, we're coming in hot. And I said, I think we're going to make it, but I would suggest that we have emergency vehicles out. So the plane's coming in, one of these types of deals, and the fire trucks are racing alongside, and we touch down, and we're looking at each other, and we're still throwing up. But we have nothing left. So you see these firemen coming running over with these silver fire suits on, and as they get close, they're looking at it like, what the hell happened on the inside of the plane? So the first guy opens up the door, he throws up in his silver suit, and I fall out that door, and I'm like low crawling away, and I'm trying to pull the POW out with me, and and you see the guys see what's happening, the rescue guys, and they go, I don't think so. So we're lying there, and they come over with these high-pressure fire hoses, and they're squirting us down, and they squirted down the inside of the airplane, totally ruined it. Totally, it's $100,000 worth of instruments and stuff, but nobody would go near it. Nobody would go near it to clean it out. So the last I saw it, which was a month later, it was still at the end of the airfield, with flies all around it and all that shit. It was unbelievable. So that's a story I tell about my Vietnam experience that anyway, people like to hear. Those are the kind of the bizarro things that happen to you in combat that nobody necessarily likes to think about or talk about. But anyway.
That's a good one.
So I had gone on a couple other combat operations, but again, I was in a relatively safe area. Now, the camp did get hit about 6 months after I left, but the time that I was there, in all the patrols and stuff that we ran around, it never saw anybody. So all our action was actually on the border. There's one other story I was going to tell you, and I can't remember it now, but anyway. But other than that, so I had the option of re-upping for another 6 months back in Vietnam, but I had just been married and, I didn't think my new wife, who's now my ex-wife, would go for it. So I was going to get out of the Army. I had my time was up. And two of my sergeants had been with a unit called Detachment Berlin, which was a very classified unit in Berlin of special forces guys, long hair, civilian clothes. They would do infiltrations across the border, bring in back, spies and those types of things. Plus, you get to go to Oberammergau for a year to go to German. You had to speak fluent German to it. I said, okay, I'll do that for the next 3 years. So I get off the airplane with my wife in Frankfurt. And I said, I'm sorry, Captain. I was promoted at that time. But you're not going to Oberammergau in Berlin. You're going to the 509th Airborne in Mainz. And at that time, all our officers were getting picked out from all the airborne. It was the only airborne unit in Europe to go to Vietnam, because Vietnam was kind of winding down, but they were still running short of officers there. So when I got there, a battalion ordinarily has about 62 people, 62 officers, and it was only, I think, 9. So I went very reluctantly, but it was the best assignment I ever had. Most fun I ever had in the Army. So,
What kind of stuff were you doing there?
well, we did a lot of, we went to Norway, Greece, UK, all over Germany. So again, we were the only airborne unit in Europe, 2 battalions, American airborne units. So we got to work with all the airborne, that's why I've got all these jump schools that I went to. And I was a liaison to the British Parachute Regiment. So I used to go back and forth to London and work with these guys in Aldershot and some of the training locations they were at. And the one thing that really stands in my mind, I worked with a Scottish volunteer, their reserve, they call them volunteers unit. And myself and my commander were invited to go to a dining inn over there. So we show up at their battalion commander's house was a mansion. He was obviously a wealthy guy besides being a colonel in the Army. And it was one of the most unforgettable nights of my life. So sitting around this table that was probably 30 feet long were senior parachute regiment officers who were in the reserves. So they all had different uniforms on. Several of them had kilts. This is up in Aberdeen. One was a guy who had won 3 or 4, whatever the Second Valor Award was during World War II. Just an intriguing group. And as we're eating dinner, and then of course it was very stylized. You had, white wine before, and with the fish dish, and red wine with the other meat dish, and a bagpiper would walk around the table piping, Patty, play the lament. Phineas, get up and do that dance you do when you get drunk. It was just fabulous. So I convinced both units to have a joint training session in Scotland. So most of the paratroopers I had in my company in the 509th had never been outside the city that they lived in before they went into the Army. They had and they were all young, 18, 19, 20 years old. So we did a big parachute operation. We jumped in jointly to Aberdeen. And then we went to a dining inn with all our officers in the battalion. And the NCOs went to the NCO club, and the enlisted men went to the enlisted men club. So we go in, and it's the same group of officers that I had been with before. So, and everybody had their dress uniforms on. So we had our dress blue uniforms, which we wore at that time. And then each one of them had their regimental uniforms. And because they were reserves, they were from different kinds of regiments. So it was a very, very colorful event. So at the end of a very stylized dinner, the colonel gets up and he said, well, I think it's time for parlor games. And we're looking at each other, what the hell is parlor games? So he said, Captain Gallagher, you're in charge of the American team, and Captain Maines, you're in charge of the British team. So the two leads come out, and the games will start. So I come out, and I know Maines, and I said, what is this? And he said, you'll see. So the colonel gets up, and he said, are both teams ready? Yes, sir, we're ready. So he throws the flag down. So Maines looks at me, rips my jacket open, and my buttons go flying off, punches me, and both sides run against each other, screaming and yelling like banshees. I went, what the hell is this? And everybody's dead drunk by that time. So they break down, and guys are bloody, and one guy broke his hand. So then the first game was, where are you, Mrs. Moriarty? So what happened was, I would hold his hand. We were laying on the floor, and our hands would be tied together, and we would be blindfolded. And they gave each of us a heavy book. And you would go, where are you, Mrs. Moriarty? And he would try to say, throw you off. And you'd slam the book down where you thought his head was. Well, what the fuck is this? So we did that for a while. And then the other officers got to do it. And then we did knights jousting. Got a guy in your shoulders, and you would run across with a broom trying to knock the other ones. These are two very sophisticated military, and these are all officers. And we had the last one, there was several other things, but the last one was, now the Brits in World War II, they didn't fly Dakotas, they flew Halifax bombers. So they jumped to the bomb bay. And they trained, so when I went to the parachute school, they also had a thing where you jump through in one of the practice fields, not in the plane itself, but they had a tether just to get you used to jumping that way. So at the top of this, which is about 10 feet up, they had an opening that was, 6 feet by 4 feet. So everybody traipsed up the stairs and went, and it was like in the attic. And you were going to do a parachute landing fall, which is very stylish. So when you jump out and you're about to land, you brace your feet and do this, and then you roll either way. First guy jumps out, breaks both his legs. Second guy comes up, lands right on top of him, knocked both of them out. Third guy jumps out, breaks something else. And people were just jumping, And after about, 9 or 10 people coming out, and almost every one of them hurt, the colonel comes over and very politely says, I think that's enough. I think we're over with. So we're leaving that night to go back to the barracks that we're sleeping in. There is bodies everywhere. Drunk, arms around each other, Brits and Americans, it was just a love fest. And they were all drunk. And, the next morning we had to go out, and there was still bodies laying on the ground because we had to fly back to Mainz. And I had this kid from Detroit. He goes, Captain Gallagher, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. He had little bubbles coming out of his mouth. And he said, I'm going to remember this day for the rest of my, or last night for the rest of my life. So it was, we had a lot of casualties, but it was a very, very funny time. So anyway.
That's awesome.
So that was my time in the 509th. I loved it. It was the best assignment I had. The battalion commander was a guy named Dick Woods, who was the best soldier I've ever seen. He was Schwarzkopf's roommate at West Point. He graduated. He wasn't top of his class, but he was very close. And he was just an absolutely incredible soldier. He became a major general, and he actually brought me to the Pentagon to work with him for a short period of time when I was in the reserves. And then he died, and his family asked me to do the eulogy for him. So I did the eulogy at Arlington National Cemetery. If you've never seen a general being buried, it's unbelievable. It just blew me away. So I did the eulogy, and everybody in the audience were generals and colonels and all that stuff. He had a full marching band. He had a full company of soldiers, marching with him. Big casket, or the big caisson with the horses and everything. I mean, it was just awe-inspiring, but a perfect way to send him off. I mean, the guy was just great. He was my idol, both in the Army and then, afterwards too. So.
What was the most valuable thing he taught you?
Don't ever try to be something that you're not. He was a very self-effacing kind of guy, very professional. And, you knew he was a leader immediately, but he never tried to be anything. Like, there was another brigade commander that came over him who was just an asshole, total asshole. As a matter of fact, he gave Colonel Woods, my time, who was on the colonel's list, he gave him a derogatory OER, which should have ended his career. But Woods was so respected by other generals who knew him. He still became a major general. He was actually on the lieutenant general, 3-star general list, when he had a massive heart attack and had to go. So in the chance that you may think Vietnam was nothing but a laugh fest, I'll tell you one more funny story. So as I said, we spent most of our operations were on the border. So we were going through a very, very, very thick bamboo forest. And bamboo grows, it's almost impossible to get through. I mean, you're weaving, in and out. But elephants would walk through and create a trail about wide enough for one elephant to get through. So it's maybe, 3-4 feet wide at tops. But they would trample everything down. So you get lazy, which you should never do in Vietnam, obviously, but, and I had 100 Montagnards, 100 plus. So after hours and hours of fighting our way through the bamboo, we started to drift over, and there was a small elephant trail. So we said, okay. So I sent scouts out in front, and we're walking down, and it's about, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, hotter than hell. So just drenched in sweat, it's humid. And all of a sudden I hear a couple shots way up front. Now, oh shit, we came into something, right? But there's no place to maneuver. And all of a sudden, people were starting to rush towards me. And I went, stop, what? Stop, we don't retreat. And they're looking at me like, yes, we do. And then in the back I hear, frickin' elephants are running down the trail. And these guys, at that time, several of my Montagnards were carrying an M1 carbine like that, which is like a pea shooter. And and these aren't these big African elephants, they're smaller Indian elephants. But they're coming right at you on a 3-foot wide trail. It got pretty scary. So people are like dropping their weapons and their backpacks, and they're like climbing through these trees off the road to get away. And I'm looking, and there's probably, 40 people in front of me, and they get 30 people and then 20 people. And I said, oh shit. So I dropped my backpack, I kept my weapon, and I'm squeezing in between these bamboo things, and these elephants come right by me. And I didn't even attempt to shoot them. Nobody else attempted to shoot them. So then they kept going down the trail, and it took me like 3 hours to get everybody back. But I went over and I got my rucksack, and it stepped right on it, and it broke everything that was inside. It stepped on our radio. It was probably the most interesting thing, the bizarre, among several bizarre things that happened to me over there.
Tell us about the Cobra.
Oh, so we were in I think it was an old Michelin rubber plantation, right on the border. And they had barracks where obviously the workers used to live. And you'd go in and you'd see a long hallway with all these rooms outside. And some of the doors were open and some of the doors were closed. So, but you had to make sure. So, you did a room clearing as you go down. So two guys would go in one room and clear it, and then the next two guys would go in another room. And the clearing it is just a matter of opening up the doors because they were small, and just walking in and making sure there's nobody there. So I clear one room. I'm in the room. The door opens up, and I walk in, and there's a window there, and something caught my attention in the window, and then movement caught my attention on the corner of my eye, and I turned around, and on a thing that was about this high, a bureau, was a cobra. And he was up, which meant he was right at my level, so his eyes were looking at my eyes. And I had never experienced this before. Every hair on my head, on my body, just stood up, and I was absolutely frozen. It was like, now he wasn't close enough to bite me, but when a cobra's standing there looking, and there's nothing between you and him, your mind doesn't work like that. So fortunately, the guy who came in behind me had a shotgun and blew the thing away. But this sucker was like 12 feet long. So another jumped out of a helicopter, did a night operation, and the helicopter drops you off, then moves and stops at like 5 different places, so they never know what drops you off. And so it was myself, and I was the only American. It was just going to be a very short, very quick recon mission. And I had 5 Montagnards with me. So when you get out of the helicopter, you lie down in a circle pointing out. So I wait, 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, and the helicopter takes off, and I didn't hear anybody around us, and it was dead quiet. So I said, okay, let's get up and move to the RON where we're going to stay that night. And one guy's lying there, and I go over and, come on, we're going. Didn't move. Turned him over, he was dead. I went, what the hell? So I immediately called the helicopter back and said, I already got a DOA. This mission is over. So he tried to figure out what the hell was the matter with him. I thought he had a heart attack, but these guys, he was only 15 years old. So a lot of the Montagnards were very, they started carrying weapons at 13. So we get him back to the camp, stripped him down naked, and Doc says, this is what happened. He jumped out of the helicopter and stepped right on a cobra. Cobra bit him right on the neck. And he said he was dead within seconds.
Wow.
And that definitely got your attention. So you were stepping out of the helicopter at night going like this. So anyway, that was a bizarre incident. I mean, that really...
I remember at one point you were talking too about, first question I have is, did you have any encounters at night that were a little eerie or anything that, in the jungle?
Well, we had, I think I told you, we had a lot of tigers in our area. We had our hunters killed 3 of them. But not necessarily. I mean, there was times where we just set up the whole night, because they always hit you at dawn. So there's a lot of times. So I got to the point where I put my hammock so it was only about a couple inches off the ground, so I could just, if something happened, I could just roll out of it. But there was times where you just laid on the ground or just sat back to back, depending on how many guys you had with you. So I never, not that I remember anything, or anyway, but.
Because you don't get a lot of like moonlight down there, right? So it's like probably dark,
Yeah,
dark.
yeah. And you want to, when you stop at night, your RON, you want to stop in something heavily overgrowth. So A, you can hear people coming, but B, they have to make noise to get to you. So, and again, it's easy when you have like 6 guys or 8 guys on a patrol to do that. It gets much tougher when you have 100 guys to find a place like that to do it. So ordinarily you stop at about 5 o'clock, you have dinner, again, half eat and half, man the perimeter. And then you send out scouts at the 4 points of the compass to find a place that you're gonna stay overnight. And just as it's getting dark, you move to that location. It's usually about 100, 200 yards away. So in case somebody's followed you, they don't really, in theory, know where you moved to. So, and I was fortunate we never got hit at night with us. So, one last story, and again, nothing to do with Vietnam. So I told you we were very short-handed in the 509th Airborne. So I'd get bored at night when I had the operations deal. So one night I send out letters to all the airborne units in NATO saying, and I was the operations officer for the battalion at that time. I had already given up command of my company. And I said, we'd love to do some airborne operations with you. Nobody had ever done that before. So all of a sudden, General Rattan, who was commander of the division, called up my brigade commander, who called up my battalion commander, said, who is this Captain Gallagher that the British, the Belgians, the Norwegians are all saying they want to do an airborne operation with him and that he's going to be the liaison to them? And my guy thought it was funny. The brigade commander did not think it was funny. So he said, on whose authority did you do that? I said, well, sir, I was just seeing whether, they might be interested. And I'm the operations officer. I got to plan these kinds of things. So that's how I wound up going to several of those jump schools and stuff. So, but then General Aaron, who had been my commander in Vietnam, became chief of staff of the 5th Corps in Frankfurt. So he had 3 divisions underneath him. So again, at night I would get bored, and I'm a pretty imaginative kind of person. So I would say, I sent one, I did a study, I said on camouflage fatigue. I said, why don't we have camouflage fatigues? I said, we have green uniforms in Germany. I said, in Vietnam, I wore camouflage all the time. Why doesn't the U.S. Army have camouflage fatigues? I sent it to he had a thing called dial command, where you could send ideas. And he said, we want to hear ideas. So I sent it to him, and I CC'd somebody in Washington, D.C. in the Pentagon about that. So the Pentagon all of a sudden decided to do a study on camouflage fatigues. So I said, oh, I've touched on something here. So every night when I was the operations officer, I would send another idea. Why don't we take, like, Israel has all these Russian tanks and stuff that they just took in the war. Why don't we put these out in the training areas and say, here's where you hit a T-34. Here's where you shoot. Here's where you shoot off the tracks. Here's what for an armored personnel carrier, here's what you do. So after a while, I was getting a reputation that, and I told this later on, or I was told this later on when I became General Aaron's aide, that I was called Captain Dial Command. And every day, he would get all the staff together, and somebody would invariably ask, what did Captain Dial Command send in? And they would read it off. And he would actually act on each one of those. He said, you, I want you to check this out. You, I want to check it out. So, and then he asked me to be his aide.
That's really cool.
Yeah. But my very close friend who I just had Thanksgiving with down in Tampa, he was an administrative officer in the 5th Corps. And he said, you used to drive us frickin' nuts. We used to laugh at you, and then we found out Captain Dial Command was coming here to be the general's aide, and then you showed up, you being the personality that you have and everything, and everybody was going, I thought this guy was to be a raving maniac, and we still think you are a raving maniac, but in a good way. So,
can you tell us? You talked a little bit about Panama earlier. Can you tell us what that was about? Like what you guys were doing there?
Yeah. So was it 89 or whatever? I think Delta Force went in and tried to capture Noriega. I know they pulled a guy out of a prison, a civilian out of the prison, and then we invaded Panama. But Noriega had these little airfields around Panama with like getaway jets. And the case that we were guarding was a Falcon 50. We weren't guarding it. We were out in the jungle just watching to make sure it didn't take off. And the order was if the plane tried to take off, just shoot the tires out or something like that. Don't shoot it down, obviously, but shoot it up enough to where it can't take off, the engine thing. Again, very boring.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, I read.
It's still cool, though.
Yeah, I read 2 pocket, paperback books and laying in my hammock. And so we always had 2 guys watching, and the rest of us were back about 150 meters in a circle.
The last one I wanted to ask you about was Munich, and what happened there, and then you guys being close to going over there.
So, as I said, I was General Aaron's aide, and he had been my commander in Vietnam. So he said to me, now this is just off the record, off the books, but this was before Delta Force. 10th Special Forces was there, but Bad Tulsa down on the Swiss border. And he said, form a quick reaction team of people that you know from the 509th and some other units that we can get together real quick, because the terrorist stuff was really starting to heat up. They were, hijacking planes. They were they blew up 3 planes, I think, in Jordan. And they were starting to assassinate people, including where we were stationed. They killed a lieutenant colonel who was Aviator of the Year. They blew up a thing in our officers club, and a couple other places. They killed some people. So just get that kind of unofficial but put together a group. So we happened to be training with this German unit as the Olympics started. So we were, I don't know, 20 or 30 clicks away, and got a call saying, where are you? And I said, well, we're, I can't think of the name, it's written up there, but anyway, wherever we were, I told him. And he said, well, there's something going on in Munich right now. We don't know what it is, but, you should start to prepare for it. And I said, sir, we were just shooting out in the range and everything. We don't have any bullets or anything. We're just cleaning our weapons and stuff. And he said, if anything happens, don't worry about it. We'll get you everything you need, ammunition, all that stuff. And I had like 20 guys with me at that time. So we started watching TV and listening to radio, and Black September had come in, jumped over the fence, and went into the Israeli dorm. Most people have heard the story, and killed 1 and took, I think, 11 Israelis hostages. And they were demanding to be flown to Libya or, an Arab country like that, or they were going to kill the hostages. And they all had weapons and stuff. They were all dressed in athletic clothes and that kind of deal. So we were near this airport And I said, you know, this is a possible place where a plane could come in and take them away. And I'm sure there were several others around there that could do the same thing. So he said, well, just keep an eye on it. Not visually, but, you know, sooner or later, if anything happens, you'll go just visually. But later on that afternoon, I got a call saying, you know what, this is not, they do not want, the German government does not want any Americans involved in this. And we had been working with the German teams, and they said, we got a call saying you can't do anything because there was a proviso after World War II that German Army could not do something on German soil. So as you know, they wound up sending a Munich police group in who had no experience in that kind of stuff at all. They gave them hunting rifles that weren't even real. So the thing was a debacle. But that German who you see in the picture, he was up there as kind of a quasi-advisor to that group.
What happened when they tried to go in and shut that situation down, when the police or SWAT team got there?
So what happened was they did provide him a plane. I think it was a 727 with 2 pilots, and they put 6 Munich cops on the plane with pistols. And when the thing was, when the helicopter was coming, there was no real planning on this. When the helicopter was landing, they were supposed to bring the hostages into the plane, and these 6 cops were supposed to jump out and shoot them. So 6 cops, the 2 pilots got up and started to walk out, and the 6 cops looked at each other and go, no fucking way, we're standing in here. So everybody left the plane, and they went out off the runway into the high grass. 2 helicopters land, the Israelis, I think 5 in one and 6 in the other, all handcuffed. The head terrorist climbs the stairs, goes into the plane, sees it's totally empty, no pilots. He comes out really pissed off. And then the searchlights come on that the police have up in the control tower. And then the terrorists immediately shoot those off. And then they go in and they shoot everybody in the helicopters and threw grenades and killed all the Israelis. And then ran out to the field, and there was a kind of a firefight with the cops out in the field. I think the cops killed 2, captured 3. And then about a month later, they hijacked another plane and demanded the release of, they're going to blow up the plane with all the civilians on it. So they handed over the 3 terrorists who went to Libya. The Israelis, who do not forget those kinds of umbrages to them, hunted down every single one of them and killed them over a course of probably, I think, 4 or 5 years. And the last one they killed was not one of the terrorists. It was a mistaken identity. I think it was a waiter, and I think it was in Norway. Again, I'm a little bit hazy about that. And that's when a big furor went up. And that's when people found out that the Israelis were actually assassinating all these guys. So that was the last one that they wound up. But they got 11. And Eric Bana is in a movie about, I think that was the movie, I think he was in it, about how they hunted down each one of these guys. And they were scattered all over Europe. And it was not just the terrorists that were in the attack, it was the guys that funded them and the guys that provided intelligence and all that. You know, the Israelis, God bless them, they're masters at that kind of stuff. So, and they don't forget, nor should they. So.
Very cool.
And then after that, in 79, they started, or 78, 79, they started Delta Force. And it's Beckwith was the guy who started it. And he was the guy that went to, with the SAS, spent a year with them, and copied a lot of the concepts to start Delta Force on it. So, yeah.
Cool. Anything else you want to talk about as far as that's concerned?
I don't think so. I'm sure, you know, like the other guys, as soon as you leave, I'll say, oh, I should have said this, I should have told that.
Luckily, we're going to have a part 2 of this, which is good, you know, because there's a whole lot of stuff. Because I remember the story you talked about, the lamps in the middle of the night you could see. from one of the bases you were on. That was a wild one.
I'll tell you one more
Yeah.
story. I forgot about that one. So we got intelligence that a North Vietnamese, it was almost a division, it was multiple regiments, were going to attack a camp called Bu Prang, right on the Cambodian border. So the Army in all its wisdom said, well, we know they're circling Bu Prang to attack them. We're going to set up 3 fire bases in a triangle around Bu Prang to put suppressive fire on these people. But whoever came up with the concept didn't say, okay, you've got 3 small fire bases. Who's going to protect them? So I think each one of the camps had to send a team. Mine sent me with my 100 Montagnards to a place called Firebase Kate. And I think it was Kate, Mary, there were Betty, there were women's names of the 3 fire bases. So I landed, and then the cannons were brought in, and 35, 36 artillery guys came in to man the cannons, obviously. But I looked around, and there was hills higher than mine, you know, within a click of mine. I said, whoever picked out this position? It was the stupidest damn position, you know, but it was totally bald. So we immediately started digging, you know, foxholes and stuff, and I think we had 1 row of concertina wire. And I called back to the commander, and I said, this is nuts. I said, we're only, I think we were like 7 kilometers, which is not a long way from the camp. So I said, and you know they're going to be, North Vietnamese are going to be sending out patrols and, you know, seeing who's going to be supporting them and all that kind of stuff. So fortunately for me, I had R&R already scheduled. So I was only on Kate for about a week, maybe 8 days, and left to go on R&R. And my camp commander came in and took my place. And he was on there for, I think, about 4 more weeks. And then another guy came in, I'm embarrassed to say, Bill Albrecht came in. He had literally just got off the plane. He was a 20-year-old captain, had been based in Thailand and wanted to go to Vietnam. Got off the plane. They had too many officers at Bu Prang. That was the camp that was going to get hit. So they sent him out to take over Firebase Kate. He gets off the plane at like 7 o'clock. I think this is the story, 7 o'clock in the morning. By 4 o'clock, B-40 rockets started flying in from all the surrounding hills, blew up the 3 cannons immediately. Didn't kill anybody. But then the next day, again, they started heavily shelling them and firing, you know, attacking them through the wire and the woods and stuff. And one of the artillery lieutenants got killed. And after, I think the 3rd day, Bill called back and said, I'm running out of ammunition. I'm running out of food and water. You guys got to get us out of here. Well, we want you to hold tight. You know, somebody's going to be coming to your rescue. But the Vietnamese refused, and the Americans were too busy at other places, and we had no more reaction forces able to go in there. So they sent a Mike Force team, which Mike Force is a special forces unit, kind of like a strike team, company size, battalion size actually. But they were still far away. So at about midnight, he got everybody together and he said, we're getting our asses off of this hill. Because I don't think anybody's coming in to get us. So he goes down right off the hill through the wire, and they had multiple probes throughout those 2 or 3 days there. So guys attacking through the wire, and he knew sooner or later they were going to break through and annihilate him. So he took him out. He could have gone left or he could have gone right, and he was going to go left, but the scout that he had went right, and he took the rest of the front guys with him. So he said, oh shit, I got to follow them. Fortunately, if he had gone left, there was a huge L-shaped ambush all ready to just annihilate him. So they went the right way. And then that night, I think 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, he ran into the Mike Force team. And then they marched him back to another Special Forces camp. So he wound up staying there he went to the Mike Force, got 3 Silver Stars, turned up to be a Secret Service agent for, I think, 25 years. Very, very interesting guy, but absolutely a true hero. Think about being 20 years old, put on this hill, immediately being attacked by a regiment, 4,000 North Vietnamese, having your guns blown up, your shells going, your guys hiding down in the holes because they stick your head up and shrapnel flying everywhere, and being probed by these guys. So, true hero.
Yeah.
True hero.
Wow.
So,
you want to talk about what you did after the military at all? You want to save that for the next one?
yeah, I'll save it. I'll give you another very quick story about how I wound up what I'm doing. So I was in graduate school, and I was in the armor for whatever reason. They sent me the armor career course. So every captain has to go through what's called a career course, which is I think it's a year long, 2 years long. And it's to prepare you for next, for major and lieutenant colonel and that type of thing. So I had decided at that time I was getting out, but one of my wounds I had, that the head wound I talked about, wound up slicing my eye, beside my scar, it sliced my eye muscle, so my eye was starting to wander around. So they operated on it, and they have a thing called a Lenman weekend, where all these companies, big, General Electric and General Motors, and everybody comes in looking for management talent, which all young lieutenants and captains getting out, they all have the management experience that they're looking for. So I went and I was interviewing with several of the different organizations, and I met with GE, and I wanted to go into sales. And at that time I had an eye patch on covering it, and my scar was being healed up. And I said, I'd like to go into sales. And the VP of HR looked at me and he said, "You would scare the living shit out of people if you walked in and tried to sell them anything. You look like a frickin' pirate." He said, "But I got just the job for you." He said, "I need a labor relations guy, negotiator, to go in and negotiate." They had unions all over the eastern part of this division did in the eastern United States. So I said, "I don't know anything about labor negotiations or anything." He said, "Don't worry about it." He said, "I'll teach." He said, "Just keep him, go in and do your diligence and do that, and present the company's position, and they'll present theirs, and it'll all work out." And it did. So I became a union negotiator. And another quick story from that for GE. So I worked my way up to the ranks pretty quick, became a VP of HR and then a VP of operations for division. And it was a travel management organization that I was the GM for. So one of my sales guys actually got the Teamsters as their client. A guy named Jackie Presser was the president of Teamsters at that time. So he asked for me to come in and meet with him and his senior management team to do the final negotiations. So I had the company attorney come in with me, and we come in, and I'm meeting, Mr. Presser is sitting at this large table, and it was like the Sopranos movie. Every guy was Jimmy the Goose, Bonzati, all the stereotypes, all the gold chains and all that stuff. And the lawyer gets up, and he's got his notes with him, and his hand starts shaking. All of a sudden, the paper is flapping and noisy, and I'm looking at Presser, and Presser's going, and then I'm looking at all these guys, and I'm going, "Oh, this is not going well." So I said, let me just explain it. I'll explain it to these guys because I really, you know, for being in special forces, you got to be really prepared. So I was always uber prepared to any of these kinds of meetings. And I'd read the rule books back and forth and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I got up in the presentation. We wound up selling it to them. So I wound up going around the country meeting with the heads of the main Teamster organizations, Kansas City, other ones. The Kansas City guy, I remember, had big, beautiful mahogany desks with big chunks taken out of it. And I can't remember his name. I said, Mr. Smith, what is this? He said, FBI listening devices. I found them all over my desk. I took my knife out and I cut them out. And he said, and I left those holes there just to remind me and everybody else what those guys do to you, you know. So Presser invited me to Las Vegas for their annual International Teamster meeting. And it was like the table times 500. So I'm sitting up in the front row. Trumpets go off. These two guys, it was like 5, 6 guys, come out dressed in these togas with these trumpets. And then they bring in Presser. And these guys are all dressed like gladiators, carrying him on one of these chairs up there, walking down the middle of and everybody's giving him a standing ovation and everything. And he gets up there and he gives a speech and all of that. It was a very, very intriguing organization to work with. I have to give it to him because he's kind of a D's, Dems, and Does guy. I don't even think he graduated high school, but he had Harvard MBAs, 3 of those guys who I worked with. Very, very sharp, astute guys. I think I worked with most of I worked with the auto workers, the steel workers, and whatever, but I enjoyed working with the Teamsters the most. I mean, they were just fun to work with, guys. You didn't want to cross them because you read all the things that happened to Hoffa and all the rest of that stuff, but they were an enjoyable group. Steel workers were the most professional that I've ever seen. I mean, these guys, they were very, very good. And the auto workers were good too, so I really enjoyed working with these unions around the country. So that's what I did actually for a couple different organizations, and then I started running some divisions and stuff. So
my dad was a 701 Teamster. So
what's that?
My dad was a local 701 Teamster.
Is that right?
Yeah. So that's funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you only did that for a few years, right? And then you went to something else?
Yeah, I did labor negotiation, then I was VP of HR. So I had labor and other stuff, but I still did the negotiations because by then I knew, a lot of the different union heads that I had dealt with before. And I think for the most part, I respected them, they respected me, and I never tried to bullshit them and, any of that. So did that, and then became the GM of the division. So that was just a small part of my stuff.
How'd you get into painting?
I did it as because my father was a commercial artist. So I did it as a kid, and I'm just okay. But I thought I could be a better painter. So when I started college, I went to their art school there at University of Dayton. But then I saw everybody else was much better than me and all starving to death, getting jobs and stuff. So that's when I had to start over again and went into business. So, but I still paint. I mean, you've seen my paintings and stuff. I still do that more for relaxation now. I used to sell them, but I don't think I've sold any recently. And then with these, as I think I mentioned to you, I started teaching tactics. I had, 6 weeks in a course that I was teaching, and I've taught at the University of Minnesota. And I started making these models for teaching tactics, primarily World War II, the Germans versus the Americans, and tank tactics and versus the Russians and that type of thing. And I kind of enjoyed it. So when I worked with Goldman Sachs, I was flying all over the world, and I'm not a party guy necessarily, but I'd be sitting in these beautiful hotels at night, and I'm an avid reader, so but you get tired of reading books every single night. So I saw a store in London that had, matter of fact, I could show you the castings. It's called the Tradition Store, and they have painted toy soldiers, but they also had castings. So I said, oh, I'll start painting these castings. But every time I would go through customs, I would have a mob of customs guys come over, take my luggage apart, take out the little castings, and they would say, oh, I remember especially the French, and especially if you had French castings and Napoleonics and that kind of stuff. So it would always take me an extra half hour to get through any kind of customs that I was going through to get on the plane. And I just found out that I kind of had an knack for it, and I enjoy it. I come down to my man room or my studio, and I paint. Either paint pictures or paint. So toys.
And some of those dioramas are pretty well recognized.
Yeah, I've got a kind of a following now. I got a call, I think I told you yesterday, and the guy just called me up again today. So people have seen my stuff both at the Chicago show that you've had, and then they've seen it like on magazine covers like this. And I enjoy it. I mean, I'm not getting rich by any stretch of the imagination doing it. I just do it for fun now. And I've met incredible people. And I mean, some of these guys who collect, they spend literally hundreds of thousands of dollars on toy soldiers and vehicles and, those kinds of things too. And most of them are very interesting, very successful. Some not so, but a lot of them are. So I've met some very intriguing, interesting people, like the guy who wrote this book, who's
we'll go through
my major client. Yeah,
with this next segment, we'll go through and look at some of the stuff in as much detail as we can today, and then obviously when we talk to you next time, we'll talk about everything. But anything else that you want to touch on before we close up this one?
I don't think. First of all, I want to thank you both for coming out, spending time with me, and listening to me babble on, and it's been very, very entertaining being with you both, and it's been great. I enjoyed it. So, again, I think I've had a pretty interesting life, and I'm 80 years old now. I can go anytime, and I hope my family would miss me, but one never knows. So anyhow, I have no regrets. So, and that's the way I want to go. No regrets.
Good.